Hi, welcome to your Midweek Minutes for Module 6. And in this module, we're looking at power, politics, and influence in organizations. And of course, in this class, we're looking at organizational behavior in a global context. So I thought I'd just take a few minutes to reflect on how different cultures within a global context can change the way managers use power and politics and influence. I think to do this effectively in a global context, you really have to understand the culture that you're working within. And so we've talked about Hofstede's cultural values in this course, but one area that we may not have talked about is the difference between high context and low context cultures. This is a way of describing cultures that are high in context are those where there's an assumption that you have a lot of background, and when you communicate, you really have to understand a lot about the traditions and the norms. So many Eastern cultures are high context cultures. Low context cultures, there is an assumption that there isn't a lot of sharing of context and background information, and so people talk a lot more directly, bluntly, more legalistically. And Western cultures like the United States are more low context cultures. So the way that influence and power and politics are used in these cultures are very different from one another. In the high context culture, people are not going to use power very explicitly. They're going to communicate their power more subtly. And if you don't understand the subtleties that they're referring to, you may totally miss what a person is saying. And this is why it's so important to understand the history and background, especially in high context cultures. In low context cultures, power is going to be used very directly. And so coming from a low context culture and trying to take that very direct and more legalistic approach into a high context culture like China or India is often a formula for disaster. So we can also, again, look at Hofstede's dimensions of national culture, and there's some that are very relevant for us. Of course, the most relevant is probably power distance. So we can look at some cultures, and they're very accepting of power differences between people. So India is the classic example of a high power distance type of culture. You've got, the caste system that historically differentiates the standing of different people in society. That's kind of the epitome of a high power distance culture. The United States tends to be more of a low power distance culture. We tend to emphasize equality between people. And so oftentimes when we are thinking about the use of power or influence in the United States, we do it in a rather democratic way. We try and get employees to participate. And that makes sense in a low power distance culture, but in a high power distance culture, like India or even Mexico, you go in and you ask for a lot of participation. Employees are not going to feel as comfortable in participating in that way. They're expecting the people in power to use their power and to wield that power, and it can diminish their feelings of confidence in leaders if they become too democratic in their processes. So I think understanding national culture, and whether it's being high context or low context or high power distance or low power distance, this is really important for understanding how to use power and politics and influence in this global context. Well, I have been meeting with your groups, and I think we're all scheduled. Some of you, we're still set to meet either this weekend or next week. If your group has not scheduled a final presentation date with me, you should be getting together and figuring that out, because my calendar's starting to fill up. As always, if you have questions, please contact me, and I'd be happy to address any concerns or questions that you have. Okay, thanks. Bye now.